All right, so we're good to go. We're going to talk here in the beginning about the state of private practice, what's going on right now. I think it's very important to understand the game that we're playing and the rules that we're playing with. And when I'm having one-on-one conversations with many of you, many practice owners, and we're talking about how they can mitigate the changes that are happening in the marketplace right now, because we're all dealing with quite a bit, can be pretty frustrating if we don't understand the rules of the game. So we're going to open up with that. So the puzzle that we're all trying to solve here, I'm assuming that if you're tuning in today, that you're in private practice and you're trying to solve revenue per visit. So we are going to be talking all throughout our time together here today. We're going to constantly come back to and reference this diagram, which is really a revenue per visit system. It's a way to systematically look at where your revenue per visit is at today, where the value that you're delivering in the marketplace, and how to systematically improve that. This is not something that you're going to take and do a single time. It's really a system that you should be deploying within your private practice, in your private practice journey. Every 90 days, you're coming back and revisiting, re-strategizing, reassessing the same exact thing, that the way that you treat a patient. If you think about it, the way that we have in here: audit, plan, strategize, implement, measure, assess, and repeat the process. That's pretty much what you're doing with a patient. We'll talk more about this later, and we're going to be exploring it in our time together here today. So let's start with this question. There is a poll that's coming up on your screen. How is your revenue per visit today versus 2019, 5 years ago? Is it same, better, or worse? We'll give this about 30 seconds here. Wow, populating very fast. Great, we'll give it another 15 seconds. Wow. I'll share the responses here in a second. We're up to over 80 responses right now. 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Great. So we have 86 responses in. We'll shut that down. Here are the results. So worst, our revenue per visit is worse, is 42% of us. Not great. And we'll talk about why that's an issue. Better is 31%. The same is 27%. And I just, with our private practice, as many of you know, I'm a private practice owner as well. We're in the worst category. So I'm right there with you. All right. So the next, you can go to the chat for this. There will not be a poll coming up, but your practice profit, right? So same idea there, same, better, worse. You can just go to the chat and type in same, better, worse for profit in the last 5 years, your margin. And while you're doing that, we're populating pretty quick here. Wow. Much worse, 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 worse. We got 2 betters snuck in there, and that's great. All right, so it looks like at least 80% are worse. And yeah, just to give you some industry metrics that are not going to be on a slide here. I know in 2018, we interviewed Bob Kowalik with RCS, and he had shared that the industry average during that time for profit margin, or margin of safety in a practice, was about 14.6%. Off the top of my head. Last year, 2023, it was less than 10%. And that is a big deal. Greg Crabtree wrote a book called Simple Numbers, Big Profits. I won't be doing a deep dive into that today, but just to give you an idea, Greg specializes in healthcare-based services, service businesses, and he calls 10% the new break even. That anytime we're under 10%, which is where our industry average is at today, we're a speed bump away from closing our doors. So not a great margin of safety for many of us. We'll talk about that today as well. Next question is on team building. So recruiting and retention. How are you doing there? Same, better, worse than 5 years ago? Again, you can go to the chat here and just type that in. I know for us, it's significantly more competitive. We got an all caps and an exclamation point there. Couple of betters or sames, but again, the majority looks like worse, right? So tough to have declining margins, decreasing revenue per visit, or even if we're staying the same, and then yeah, be able to compete and attract and retain top talent into our private practice. So obvious problem here. Okay, yep, exactly. Can't afford the salaries. Very common sentiment. So overall, how is this affecting your practice? Again, you can go to the chat and share that. Probably, yeah. Oksana, exactly. Wearing all the hats. Another one that I hear is I don't have time, right? So no time. Hard to retain staff. Lula, Jody, now, I believe you turned it around, improved morale. That's great. Kimberly, much more difficult to recruit. From Kay, growth stagnation, can't afford to hire another therapist, wait lists, overwork, doing all the jobs, staff burnout, not bringing in as much money due to can't see as many patients, poor retention, burnout. Yep. Cut. I mean, we're hearing this everywhere. It's not even exclusive to a geographic region. Very common issues. So let's take a step back here as we get started, and we're going to talk about a 30,000-foot view. And we're going to start with one of my favorite cinematic scenes of all time, 2007 movie, There Will Be Blood. And the story, if you haven't seen it, over on the right, you have Daniel Day-Lewis, who's playing Daniel Plainview, the main character in the story. Won an Oscar for this. It's if you're into movies, the acting in this is pretty ridiculous in terms of being good. And then over on the left, we have Eli Holiday. And the story follows Daniel as his journey as basically an oil tycoon. And Eli, over on the left, his family owns a plot of property that has a lot of oil underneath it. The beginning of the story is Daniel knows that this family has a lot of oil and he has a failed attempt at buying the land. And then what he does is over several decades is he ends up buying all the land that surrounds this farm, Eli Sunday's the family farm and their land, and he drills underneath it and he ends up sucking out all the oil, all the value in the land. And there's this classic scene. The climax of the movie is Daniel Day-Lewis goes through and he talks about how he drinks the milkshake of that he drinks Eli's milkshake. And yeah, so pretty epic scene. You might want to check it out. But I feel like for many of us in private practice, this is what's happening, and we don't even understand what's going on. So I did a little bit of research, maybe a lot of bit of research, looked at where the money's going, and I just want to again talk about a big view of what's happening to us in private practice right now, so we understand the rules of the game, we understand what's going on, and then we'll have a lot of solution time. So the biggest issue is we have shrinking reimbursements, right? So I went back, pulled cms.gov, by the way, and one weekend now, a little over a weekend, it was just announced there's going to be another cut for those of us participating in Medicare in 2025. That's being proposed, right? So not only did we have a cut multiple years, but yeah, this is pretty devastating. So I went through, just in Excel, pretty simple, pulled cms.gov, looking at the conversion factor from the physician fee schedule, which I'm a private practice PT. So our reimbursements for those of us participating with Medicare is determined by the physician fee schedule and the conversion factor. If you go back to 1994, like I did here, and map out every single year, oddly, in 2024, the conversion factor is lower than what it was in 1994, the year that I was a high school junior, going from wrestling practice, volunteering, shadowing at an outpatient orthopedic clinic with Dale Hilbolt, the late Dale Hilbolt, and yeah, deciding that I wanted to become a physical therapist. So our reimbursements for federal payers are lower today than they were in 1994, with another cut coming. If we go to, and by the way, what's the hedge for inflation right there, right? Like the dollar today is worth 48%, worth less than half of what it was in 1994. And by law, for the physician fee schedule and the conversion factor, there can be no adjustment for inflation. So we're literally getting paid half of what we were 30 years ago if you're in private practice PT and you participate with federal payer. Pretty devastating. If you look at 2008, right, the great financial crisis to today, that's a 14% reduction, and that does not include the PTA reduction for those of us that are in private practice with working with PTAs on our team. So at the same time as we have this downward pressure on our revenue, we have upward pressure on our costs. And yeah, this is just the inflation that has happened because we have massive printing of money, not a conspiracy. It's very real. I don't care what administration you're with. Last administration from 2016 to 2020 was $8 trillion deficit. The current administration, 2020 through 2024, is also an $8 trillion deficit. So they're almost equal. That has a downward effect on the value of the dollar. And since 2019, so in the last 5 years, what do you think? So let's get some guesses going in the chat. What do you think inflation has been from 2019 through today? The cumulative effect of what you see in terms of monthly inflation rates on the screen. So last 5 years, Kevin says 60%, Loretta says 10%, 20, 22, 23, 30, 30 from Jody. We'll give Jody the award there. It's 32.5%. Valerie got it in there as well at 30. So 32.5%. And while your rent might not have gone up 32.5%, or your total employment costs might have not gone up that much, in some cases they're actually more than that, right? So that upward pressure creates an issue for us because income minus expenses is our profit margin or margin of safety, right? So if we have shrinking profit margins, we're less stable than we were in the past, and that can cause a lot of changes, many of which you saw in the chat there. So we have this issue going on as well. And if you look at, overall, what is happening with healthcare spend, there's and by the way, this gets like really nasty with ego. But so if you look at the US healthcare system, right, we are spending a lot of dollars. I have the exact figures later on, but it's roughly $4.5 trillion in 2023. If you divide that by the 330 million plus people that we have in the US, that comes out to $13,500 per person per year, right? So I have a family of eight. 8 times 13K is a lot, right? $104,000 per year on average to cover a family of 8. A family of 4 would be half of that, right? So that is absolutely brutal. When we look at the healthcare system, what we're spending is nearly double of any other country in the world. And what are our outcomes for the healthcare system? Any metric, any KPI that you want to look at, what are we talking about there? What's the ROI? Well, we're not in the top 20 in any category, right? And if you look at where the money is going, I have more on this later. It's not going to conservative care. It's going to other interventions. And this is an issue for many of us. So remember, that I drink your milkshake, that is happening to us, but we don't really understand fully what is going on. So we have a very expensive system, almost double of any other country in the world. And the issue is it's not effective at all, not in the top 20 in any sort of longevity or lifespan or chronic diseases, anything like that. Like our rates are not good, right? So spending a lot of money and it's not effective. And in the end, there are 3 main places that we can look and pay attention to. Again, I'm going to mention politics here, but there's no side. It doesn't matter the side. So if you're triggered by that, I apologize in advance, but we should at least look at it and talk about it. So the first point of view that we should understand in terms of what we're battling against is the politician. In general, what do politicians do? They make promises to be elected, and then they're forced to try to honor that, right? And they have to protect the the special interest and best interest of their constituents, the people that elected them, right? I'll leave it at that. And, you know, regardless of the side you're on, you're going to do one of two things um, politically to make sure that happens. One is you're going to borrow money. The other one is you're going to print money. I mean, that's it. So, whatever the promise is, there's an issue with devaluing the dollar long term, and that creates some issues for all of us, right? Because our reimbursements are nowhere near keeping up with inflation, right? And our cost to provide those services. And that, again, I mean, I have friends that have gone out of practice in the last 5 years because they just couldn't, there was no margin of safety at all, right? The second one that we should understand is the insurance company CEO. Most of them have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders of their company. You can go buy, shares in, by the way, do you know who Aetna is owned by? Which many of us participate with. Aetna is owned by CVS, right? So, um, an insurance company is owned by a pharmacy retailer, right? It's the same company. And very interesting storyline that has happened. And since we're on Aetna, let's just run down that pathway a little bit. So if you remember, for those of you that have been around for a few decades, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, January 12th, 2007, Vanessa Furman's published an article, absolutely amazing for private practice PTs. And what happened is they looked at the Virginia Mason Hospital and how triage was treating people who presented with back pain, acute back pain, right? And there were two pathways. One was the pathway down diagnostic imaging, injection, ultimately surgery. The other one was conservative care with PT. When they did the analysis, when Aetna did the analysis with Virginia Mason Hospital, they noticed that when people went to conservative care first, that the average plan of care was $900 to $1,200. When they went to more invasive care, diagnostic imaging, et cetera, it was $2,200 to $2,400 per plan of care. And the issue is not only is it double the cost, right? What do you think the difference in outcomes was? They were relatively the same, right? So same outcome, this pathway is significantly less expensive. Now, oddly, if you go back and you read that entire article 17 years ago, uh, and they interviewed the head of the hospital, he said something along the lines of, there's a direct quote that I have later in here, which is he said, this is great for patients. This is great for the insurance company. This is great for everybody across the board, except the hospital system. We're losing out, right? So, I mean, it just gives you the idea right away that, the hospital system, the insurance company, that what they're looking for is they have a fiduciary responsibility first and foremost. That means that they have to be profitable. Well, by law, what's the only way that an insurance company can increase their profits? They have to pay out more, right? I know I had I believe it was Tony Sear on the podcast and on the virtual summit in the past, and we were another very successful owner down in Gainesville, Florida. Tony and his wife Melissa running an awesome practice there. And I believe the one thing that Tony said is, insurance companies want to save money. And I said, I'm not sure that to be true. Like, I haven't really seen that. I believe they actually want to spend more money. And that, if they're paying $900 for a plan of care or $118,000, $900 for a plan of care for back pain and $118,000 for a spinal fusion, that it seems to me, and in my area, it's 10x within the last 10 years, right? Spinal fusions. So it seems to me that there might be encouraging pathways to go that route. And you can't tell me that, Aetna, CVS with 300,000 employees and a CEO there, that, there's not a preference. It's easier for a person to get prescription medication than it is to go to conservative care. I have a friend who just came through for therapy, $75 copay. He's basically paying his entire visit. I said, well, were you ever prescribed the medication? He said, yes. And I said, well, what's your copay for a medication? It was $3, right? When he goes to CVS. So, just think about what's happening here. and take a close look at it. You can do this by talking with your family or patients, anything else, but realize that there is a vested interest from the insurance company CEO around profitability and taking care of financially their fiduciary responsibility with their shareholders. Same thing with a healthcare system CEO. There's that quote, that Virginia Mason Hospital now is part of Common Spirit. They have 150,000 employees. Obviously, they want to be profitable so they can take care of their employees and continue to grow and expand and everything else there. So they're the three big forces, that we're up against in private practice. And if you really think about it, conservative care, so CMS considers conservative care to be physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, chiropractic care, podiatry, dentistry, optometry, those seven specialties. And ultimately, if somebody comes to us for $1,000 plan of care and they cancel their lumbar spine fusion, that's a threat to somebody, right? It's a threat to the surgeon and his economic well-being. It's a threat to the healthcare and hospital system. That we're going to generate revenue from that as well, and it's a nasty truth with the way that our healthcare system works right now. We need to understand that if we're going to ultimately solve it. And don't worry, this won't be all doom and gloom, but we are going to look at what's going on so that we can better solve it later on. Ultimately, what are we here together for? I think we're united, most of us, on this in terms of what we're looking to accomplish. Over on the left, we have, the current healthcare system today, pharmaceutical injection, surgery via physician or healthcare system service represents, and you can throw diagnostic imaging there, represents about 72% of that $13,500 per year per person we're spending. Conservative care, all of conservative care is 10%, right? So those seven industries combined are 10% of that money, or roughly $1,300 per year split between PT, OT, speech, chiropractic care, optometry, dentistry, and podiatry. What do we want to happen? Well, it seems to make a lot of logical sense, especially if we look at other healthcare systems around the world, that conservative care is first, especially before those more invasive procedures that don't necessarily have the same outcomes that we get within conservative care. By the way, are we all on the same page here? Does anybody agree? Just write, I agree in the chat if you agree with this is what we're aiming to do. This is what we want over on the right-hand side. This is what we're working towards. Right on. Sweet. Preach on. That's great. Okay, cool. So that's what we're trying to do. That's where we're going. And, ultimately in the end, we're going to talk about improving revenue per visit and really what it's going to take. So, the first thing that we need is better systems. I have a master's of science in physical therapy from College Misericordia, go Cougars. But, beyond that, no formal business training with a degree, right? So, yeah, in the end, was never trained on business systems. While I was going through PT school, I was trained to be a clinician. And really what happens for most of us, we go to school, we come out, we work for somebody, we have our degree, we're super proud. And most of us in private practice have some sort of jaded experience, right? Mine was, I worked in a practice where they used the same electrodes on every single patient, and that just drove me crazy. So I was going to go into practice for myself, and every patient was going to get their own electrode pads and their own towel and all this other stuff, right? So I got out, I'm now on my own, and all of a sudden I realized that I know how to treat. I have no idea how to handle personnel, how to do marketing, how to wear all the other hats, how to wear the financial hat or anything else, how to build systems. I had no idea how to do that, right? So I had to go invest heavily and learn how to do that. And of everything that I've done, so I don't care whether you're using like EOS, Traction, Gino Wickman, or Vern Harnish scaling up, whatever it is that you're looking at, we have to understand how to build better systems, especially in private practice, right? You can have amazing treatment systems, right? If I asked how many of you have the highest quality of care in your area, right? You're crushing it, Right. Every single person on here would say we have the highest quality of care in our area. Right. So your clinical systems are amazing. Okay, now let's talk about your personnel systems. How are you doing at recruiting, interviewing, retaining, et cetera? Like we don't have that, right? How are we doing at financial? We don't have that. So we have amazing clinical systems, but we have nothing else to support it, primarily in marketing, personnel, and finance. So think about this, just so we're all on the same page. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. A system is an assembly of processes, right? So when I'm treating a patient, if I'm looking at my clinical system where I have high quality of care, I have a process for how I do the eval, for how I do the history review, for how I go through objective measures, through how I do the patient interview, through how I do my special test, through how I create a plan of care, right? So that's a process. A process is a how-to, right? And then I might have another process on, for example, treatment progression or how often I reassess that patient. Am I doing it every visit? Am I doing it once a week? Am I doing it, every 2 weeks or 4 weeks? What does that look like? Might have a process around writing a progress report, an eval, a discharge report, how I communicate with the referral source, et cetera, right? So I have processes there. You're probably doing this and you don't even think about it. It's just in your head and you just do it innately. But then we get over to finance and we have no idea how to do it, right? So we have processes, which are the how-tos, and then those processes working together create a system, right? We all in agreement on that? Like that's right. And I'll get into some more examples here. Three key areas that we need to focus on in order to grow our practice: personnel, finance, and marketing. And I'll keep talking about those forever. So here's a very simple process. Um, how many of you would like to improve your payer mix right now? You can just go to the chat. I'm going to give you a very simple exercise. Great. So improve your payer mix. Select a patient. And we're going to talk about this throughout today. So you have a best payer. Pick who your best payer is. For me, it's going to be Highmark, right? Is our best private insurer reimbursement rate. So quick mental exercise. Imagine that if your entire practice was made up of your best payer, right? You won't be worried about revenue per visit, or you won't be worried about margin nearly as much as you are today. So best payer, you have a patient list, right? You have an EMR. Some of you have been in, practice for 3 or 4 decades. You have a gigantic patient list. You get to pick a patient. Pick any patient, ideally somebody who's your best payer, somebody who you haven't seen in 6 to 24 months. So, yeah, if you go beyond that, it's a little more dicey, but yeah, 6 to 24 months, somebody that you haven't seen recently, and they have the best diagnosis. So it's somebody that you want to work with again. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you should have an idea of what what each diagnosis is worth to your practice. Okay, so we picked a single patient. They're a good payer for you. You haven't seen them in 6 to 24 months, and you treated them for a diagnosis. You helped them with something that you want to see again, right? So an example for me would be like BPPV, that we see for like 2 visits on average. I'm probably not, going to include this person in this simple example. But if it was something like shoulder or back, something with a longer duration of care where I worked with them for a while, then they would qualify for my patient. The second thing you're going to do is select any media, how you would communicate with them. And I'll give you multiple examples here. You could text them, you could email them, you can call them on the phone, you could write them a direct mail piece, you could direct message them through whatever shared social media platform you're on, like Facebook, right? You could use Facebook Messenger. So there's 5 different media types. You're going to select a media type. The third thing you're going to do is write a personalized message with some form of "how are you?" I'll give you an example. "Hi, Mary. It's been 6 months since I last saw you for your shoulder pain. Heard you're back to playing pickleball again. How are you?" Very, very simple. That process, um, one-on-one gets about a 90% response rate, right? Very easy one-on-one message that you can share. The likelihood of that person reactivating if they have an issue is key, right? So something very small that doesn't involve politics, that doesn't involve insurance companies, renegotiating rates or anything like that, something very small that we can be doing. People already know, like, and trust you. You've delivered high quality of care. They're highly likely to be reactivated. This is just one small thing, one small process that we can use in our revenue per visit system to move people in the right direction. Yeah, again, I just pulled this. It's a snapshot from our practice. We go through within our EMR and break everything down by diagnosis so we can see. Um, yeah, pretty simple. The other thing that we have to do in order to improve rev per visit are, most of us are time starved. We need systems in place. We have no time to audit, no time to look. We have no time to plan ahead. We have no time to strategize and understand, how to move the needle in terms of rev per visit. We have no time to implement and, put things into action, and no time to reassess what's working and what's not.